for the people, by the people.
හදිසියෙම
මට වැදගත් වැඩක් තියෙනවා. දැන් යන්න ඕනේ.
අද රාත්‍රී 9:30
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
බින්දුවටම ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරපු සමහර දේශපාලන ප්‍රවාහයන් ආයෙනවා. කලාව නාව. ඒකෙත් කලාවක් තියෙනවා. ඒක කලාව. ඒ මොකද්ද? කොහොමද ඒක කියවන්නේ?
තරුණයෝ ඉල්ලුවේ සිස්ටම් චේන්ජ් එක. ඒක උනේ නෑනේ.
ඒක හදන්න මිනිස්සු ඉන්නව නැත්තේ නෑ.
IMF එකෙන් ණය ගත්ත හැකි. ඔව්. ආර්ථික කඩාවැටීම. මේ සංස්කෘතික කඩාවැටීම සිදු වුණාන් පස්සේ අපි කාගෙන්ද ණයට ගන්න කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා.
හරි කරගෙන කාට හරි ගෙයිමක් දීලා කීයක් හරි හොයාගෙන ඉන්න නම් පුරුෂාර්ථය හැදිලා තියෙන ජීවිතේ එතනින් එහාට යගේ හියුමන් ලයිෆ් එකේ ගමනක් නෑනේ.
මිනිස්සු ප්ලෑන් කරපු ජීවිත නැති වෙලා හැමෝටම තමන්ගේ ජීවිතය අහිමි.
ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයේ දරිද්‍රතාවයක් තියෙනවා. Poverty of democracy.
බුද්ධිමය සංවාදය බ්‍රහස්පතින්දා රාත්‍රී 10:30 මාවත
TV1 TV for life.
What's happening around the world and what's happening here at home? A very good evening to and welcome to Primetime News. I am Sandra Ferdinando.
And I'm Dithmini De Silva. Let's start off with a look at your headlines.
Four teams assigned to investigate the murder of the chief PHI. IGP assures that murderers will be apprehended soon. IGP was appointed after duly being approved by the Constitutional Council. Attorney General informs court. Opposition leader raises concerns over procedure followed by Constitutional Council to approve his appointment. Voices opposition against the speaker. Cabinet approves setting up Children of Gaza Fund. Preparations to provide $1 million to the fund. What is happening in the Sea of Sri Lanka?
In our top story for tonight, Inspector General of Police Deshabandhu Tendakon says 4 teams have been deployed to investigate the murder of Chief Public Health Inspector of the Karandenia MOH Division, Roshan Kumara. The Inspector General of Police said some information related to the crime has been uncovered by now.
The remains of the Chief Public Health Inspector of the Karandeni MOH Division in Gaul and Treasurer of the Public Health Inspectors Union of Sri Lanka, Roshan Kumara, who was shot dead, was brought to his residence this morning. Minister of Public Security Tiran Alas and Inspector General of Police Deshabandhu Tendakon paid their final respects to the late PHI officer today. They also expressed their condolences to the late PHI officer's family members.
A gunman shot and killed him in front of his mother and son. Spineless, cowardly animals do such things, and they are a burden to the country. Operation Yuktiya was launched to rid the country of such people. Investigations are being conducted. We'll try our best to nab the person who did this from any corner of the country.
මේ අපරාධ සම්බන්ධයෙන් පරීක්ෂණ පැවැත්වීමට ප්‍රධාන කණ්ඩායම් 4ක් යොදවලා තියෙනවා. මම අද උදෑසනත් මේ පරීක්ෂණ කණ්ඩායම
4 main teams were deployed to conduct investigations regarding this crime. I held discussions with the teams via Zoom this morning as well, under the supervision of the senior DIG of the Southern Province. The Criminal Investigations Department and Special Task Force were also included in it, so I believe we can uncover details regarding those responsible for this soon. I also spoke to the president of the PHI Union. We are working to eradicate organized criminal groups that are threatening the lives of everyone in this country, including PHI officers, state officials and the general public. I will take steps to strengthen these efforts over the next few days. Operation Yuktiya will also be strengthened. We have uncovered certain details. I cannot reveal them as it may hamper investigations. Based on the information we have received, I believe the investigations will be successful soon.
Two people who arrived on a motorcycle shot the chief public health inspector and fled the scene around 7:30 last morning. Chief Public Health Inspector of the Karandene MOH Division, Roshan Kumara, is a 51-year-old father of 3.
ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ සින්න නීතිය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන සෞඛ්‍ය දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ නිලධාරීන් විදියට මේ ක්‍රියාව ගත්තා.
As officials of the health department who enforce the law in Sri Lanka, we see this as a blow to all PHI officers. He was a talented, efficient and humble officer in our field who was a strength to officials who enforce the law. We condemn what was done to him. All PHI officers are not safe now. We request the IGP and the government to change this situation and carry out a fair investigation and bring these criminals to book.
මේ අනාරක්ෂිත බව නැති කළා මේ විමර්ශන කටයුතු සාධාරණය කරන සාධාරණ විමර්ශනයක් කළා මේ අපරාධකරුවන් නීතිය හමුවට පමුණවන්න.
A shooting incident was reported near a hotel in Wellawat, Colombo this morning. Police spokesperson SSP Nihal Thaluwa said that no one was injured in the incident.
The shooting took place at about 5:30 a.m. this morning. The police said that two people who were on a motorcycle opened fire into the air near the hotel and fled the scene. Police had recovered 9 ammunition cases used for T-59 firearms at the location. Investigations revealed that the gunman who had opened fire at the hotel. Police suspect that the shooting was an act of intimidation. The Wellawat police had launched further investigations to locate the suspects who fled.
Meanwhile, the Attorney General today informed the Supreme Court that the appointment of Deshabandhu Tennakon to the post of IGP has been duly approved by the Constitutional Council. Appearing on behalf of the Attorney General's Additional Solicitor General Neril Pulle informed the Supreme Court of this when 7 petitions filed seeking an order preventing the appointment of Deshabandhu Tennakon as the IGP was taken up in court today.
7 petitioners, including the Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, former MP Mujibur Rahman, have filed petitions seeking an order to prevent Deshabandhu Tennakon from serving as the acting IGP and preventing his appointment as IGP. The petitions were taken up today before a Supreme Court bench comprising Justices Preeti Padman Sirasena, Achala Vengapulli and Mahinda Samewardana. Additional Solicitor General Nerin Pulle and President's Counsel Ramesh De Silva said hearing the petitions is unnecessary as Deshabandhu Tennakon was appointed to the post of IGP. They said that an order was also requested in the petitions to prevent Deshabandhu Tennakon from serving as the acting Inspector General of Police, but he has now been appointed as the Inspector General of Police. Given the current situation, the Supreme Court bench prioritized addressing the petitions related to the appointment of Deshabandhu Tennakon as IGP and set a date for further consideration of petitions. The petitions will be taken up once again on the 2nd of April. Meanwhile, President's Counsel Manohara De Silva informed the Supreme Court today that the Mahasangha has sought to intervene in the petitions. The members of the Mahasangha who decide to intervene are Venerable Professor Kotapitiye Rahula Thera, Venerable Uduwe Dhammaloka Thera, Venerable Professor Akuratiye Nanda Thera, Venerable Induragare Dhammaratana Thera, Venerable Professor Agalakada Sirisumana Thera, Venerable Professor Madhagoda Abhayathissa Thera and Venerable Bodhagama Chandima Thera. The court will announce its decision on this application to intervene on the 2nd of April. Meanwhile, Inspector General of Police Deshabandhu Tennakon appeared before the Supreme Court today for a separate case. This was in response to a fundamental rights petition filed by Mahinda Ralapanava. The petition alleges a violation of his fundamental rights after he was summoned by the Criminal Investigation Department without being given a reason. Senior State Counsel Shamindra Vikrama, representing the Inspector General of Police, said a new circular will be issued outlining the detailed notification of reasons and charges for those summoned by the CID or the Police Special Investigation Unit. The petitions will be taken up once again on the 9th of May.
Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa called the process in which the Constitutional Council handled the appointment of Deshbandhu Thennakoon as Inspector General of Police problematic.
The Speaker also has a chance to vote at the Constitutional Council. However, the Speaker has only a deciding vote. The Speaker can only use his vote once. This applies when there is a tie. That is if there is a 4-4 vote. But that wasn't the case. There were 4 votes cast in favour, 2 against and 2 abstained. But what has the Speaker said? He has counted the 2 abstained votes as votes against, and then he has cast his deciding vote. He has then informed the President's office of the 5-4 result. Nothing like that happened at the Constitutional Council. You can take me to courts if I'm lying. I am making this statement in the open, not in Parliament. I regret that there is no rule of law in this country anymore. The Speaker is responsible for that. The Speaker must immediately convene a meeting of the Constitutional Council. We need to know what really happened. The minutes will clearly show what I said.
අපිට දැනගන්නට ඕන මොනවද කාර්ය සටහන් වල මිනිත් කළා තියෙන්නේ මොනවද කාර්ය සටහන් මොකද කාර්ය සටහන් වල තිබෙනවා අපි කියපු දේවල් බොහොම පැහැදිලිව.
Speaking to Newsfirst, Speaker Mahinda Yapabewardena maintained that the process of voting for the appointment of the Inspector General of Police was legal. The Speaker explained that when the Constitutional Council met, Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, Sagara Karyawasam and Nimal Siripala de Silva and himself voted for the appointment of Deshbandhu Thennakoon. He said that Sajid Premadasa, representing the opposition, voted against the move, while Kabir Hashim did not attend the meeting. The Speaker said that opposition leader Sajid Premadasa informed them that Kabir Hashim opposed the move via Zoom. He also said that the 2 civil society representatives representing the Constitutional Council, Dr. Pratap Ramanujam and Dr. Dinesha Samararatna, abstained from voting. Dr. Dilkushi Anula Vijayasundara, a representative of civil society, did not participate in the meeting. Speaker Mahinda Yapabewardena said that accordingly 4 members of the Constitutional Council voted for the appointment of the Inspector General of Police, while 2 members were against it. He said that the Constitution offers no explanation about the Speaker's vote in the event of abstention, only specifying the options of voting for or against. The Speaker highlighted that there is no issue constitutionally in appointing and approving Deshbandhu Thennakoon as IGP. He said that those who think otherwise can raise the matter in courts. However, Professor G.L. Pires expressed these views.
This is very clear in the Constitution. According to Sri Lankan law, the Speaker had no authority to cast his vote yesterday. It is clearly stated in the Constitution. Article 41(e)(5) states that the chairman or the other member presiding shall not have an original vote. But in the event of an equality of votes on any question for a decision at the meeting of the Council, the chairman and other members presiding at such meeting shall have a casting vote. The Constitution clearly states that he doesn't have an original vote, but he casted an original vote yesterday, violating the Constitution.
Meanwhile, Samagi Janabalawegya said the Speaker's actions have been concerning on several occasions. The General Secretary of the SJB said a no-confidence motion was moved against the Speaker due to these actions.
The Speaker didn't implement a Supreme Court determination regarding the online safety bill. The Supreme Court determined that 35 of the 57 clauses of the bill should be amended. However, the Speaker disregarded the determination by failing to amend several clauses. He justified it by claiming he was acting on the Attorney General's advice. We presented a no-confidence motion against the Speaker regarding this. We will also take action against the Speaker and the Secretary of the Constitutional Council for violating its powers in the appointment of the IGP, both in Parliament and according to the law. We had no idea the Speaker will act in this manner. The Speaker has a responsibility to represent parliamentary privileges. He is not the Speaker of the government faction. Today the Speaker is acting as a representative of the executive.
The Jatika Janabalawegya also decided to support the Samaki Janabalawegya's stance.
අපේ ආණ්ඩුක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථාව අනුව
According to the Constitution, the President has the power to appoint the Inspector General of Police with the approval of the Constitutional Council. This Constitutional Council consists of 9 members plus the Speaker. A unanimous decision from at least 5 members is required to validate the President's choice. If the votes were 4-4, the Speaker can cast the deciding vote. According to sources, only 4 members supported the appointment of the IGP. This appointment violates the powers granted to the Constitutional Council and the Constitution itself. It undermines the legal foundations of our country, both domestically and in terms of international standing, raising doubts about the integrity of our Parliament. We will vote against the Speaker at the no confidence motion since he has violated the Constitution and the Supreme Court determination.
The appointment of the IGP was discussed at the media briefing to announce cabinet decisions.
හතර දෙනාගේ තමයි පක්ෂව ඡන්දය හම්බුනේ. දෙන්නෙක් කාර්යනේ දෙන්නෙක් විපක්ෂව ඡන්දය දුන්නා. එතකොට කොහොමද ව්‍යවස්ථා සභාවේ මේක අනුමත වෙන්නේ ඇමතුමනි?
අපිට ව්‍යවස්ථාදායක සභාවේ
We as the Constitutional Council are not allowed to discuss such matters like this. That is because the Constitutional Council is the supreme institution of the country, even above the Parliament. According to the powers vested in the President has appointed the Inspector General of Police. The Constitutional Council must have approved it. The affairs of the Constitutional Council are considered confidential. I have no right to discuss that.
ඒ පිළිබඳ මට සාකච්ඡා කරන්න අයිතියක් නැහැ.
නමුත් මෙතන තියෙන එක ගැටලුවක් තමයි දැන් මේ නම් කරපු පුද්ගලයා නමුත් අර ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණයේ වැඩි කර වෙච්ච පුද්ගලෙක්. එතකොට මේ වගේ පුද්ගලෙක්
එහෙම චෝදනා කරන්න බෑ.
නෑ මෙතුමනේ මෙතුමාට විරුද්ධව ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණයේ තීන්දුවක් තියෙනවා පූර්ව වද හිංසා කිරීම සම්බන්ධ යුද හමුදා සැබලකට.
මෙතන පාර්ලිමේන්තුව නෙමෙයි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේදී තමයි ඒ කටයුතු සාකච්ඡා කළ හැකි ව්‍යවස්ථාදායක සභාව පිළිබඳ.
Police fired water cannons and tear gas to disperse a protest march by students from the University of Sri Lanka.
The protest march was organized by the Faculty of Humanities and Sociology Students Union at the University of Sri Lanka. Students engaged in the protest march against issues related to canteens, hostels, housing issues and oppressive laws.
රාජ්‍ය විශ්වවිද්‍යාල පද්ධතිය අනතුරේ වැටෙමින් තියෙන්නේ මේකට අදාළ කරන ප්‍රතිපාදන වෙන් කරන්න කියන කාරණේ අපි වොම් පැහැදිලිව කියනවා.
The student launched a protest march following a protest opposite the university premises. However, the police also announced an order issued by the court at the time. Police then fired water cannons and tear gas to disperse the students when they were trying to reach the Vijayarama junction.
In more local news, Uddika Premaratna, Member of Parliament representing the Anuradhapura district, has tendered his resignation. The announcement of Uddika Premaratna's resignation came through a formal letter addressed to the Speaker of the Parliament. Uddika Premaratna was elected to Parliament from the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna and represented Bimal Weerawansa's Uttara Lanka Sabhagya and recently declared himself as an independent MP. In the letter to the Speaker, Uddika Premaratna raised concerns about not getting an opportunity to play an active role as a youth leader. Therefore, he has decided to step down temporarily. Moving on to other local news, the Cabinet has approved the proposal made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe to create a Children of Gaza Fund in aid of Gaza violence victims.
President Wickremesinghe and Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena have instructed all ministries and government institutions directed to forego iftar celebrations and contribute to this fund. The public's contributions are encouraged and to support the health needs of affected children. The government's donation of $1 million will be distributed through official UN agencies to aid affected children. The President's media division said that the citizens can also forward their donations to the Children of Gaza Fund.
Protests were held in India today accusing the government of India of not taking any action against the arrest of Indian fisherfolk in Sri Lanka.
Meanwhile, Sri Lankan fisherfolk stress that stern steps should be taken to prevent Indian fishermen from encroaching illegally into the Sea of Sri Lanka. This report was filed by Newsfirst, Charlene Benedict.
Indo-Lanka fishing controversy. Now, what really is the issue here? Indian fishermen have been protesting for days against Indian fishermen being arrested in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankan fishermen are lamenting that not enough steps are being taken to protect the Sea of Sri Lanka. Well, we'll have to first identify the issue here. Now, this is India, this is Sri Lanka. This is the border between India and Sri Lanka now, and this border was agreed to in the 1970s between the two countries. And while the agreement was drawn up on this border and while these areas were demarcated as those areas belong to India and these areas belong to Sri Lanka, it was agreed that the Kachativu Island would be the furthermost island that is owned by Sri Lanka. And until the Kachativu Island, and just a little bit ahead of that, would be the territorial waters of Sri Lanka. Now, what's been happening for many, many decades is that Indian fishermen come towards this border from India, then they encroach into Sri Lankan waters, the Sea of Sri Lanka. That is where they encroach into, and they plunder Sri Lankan resources. Now, this narrow strip of sea that is there between India and Sri Lanka is a resource-rich area, and this portion of it, obviously, that is on this side of the border towards Sri Lanka is part of the Sea of Sri Lanka that is 8 times the size of Sri Lanka, and this is the narrowest strip of sea that is available in the Sea of Sri Lanka. Now, what's been happening for many decades is the fact that towards the evening, large multi-day fishing trawlers from India begin their voyage towards Sri Lanka, and come dawn, these ships are in Sri Lankan waters, especially surrounding the Kachativu Island. Now, I myself was privy to this fact because several years ago, when we visited the Kachativu Island for the Kachativu feast, I was afforded an opportunity to sit there towards the evening and observe what really happens, and you can visibly see these massive fishing trawlers coming towards Sri Lanka. Now, with these fishing trawlers coming towards Sri Lanka by dawn, early morning the next day, these fishing trawlers have surrounded the entire area. The area almost looks like a string of lights, if you will, in a park. That's the number, that's the magnitude in which these ships come towards the waters of Sri Lanka. This is how they encroach into the Sea of Sri Lanka, and this is the level of resources that they take back to India, and of course deprive Sri Lankan fisher folk of these privileges. Now, what these Indian trawlers do is they are massive trawlers. Compared to Sri Lankan fishing vessels, they are extremely massive, and they travel in pairs. And between these two fishing trawlers is a net that has been lodged to a heavy metallic object that runs across the bottom of the sea. Now, this practice is known as bottom trawling, and this is highly detrimental to the marine environment, and it is in fact a banned fishing practice here in Sri Lanka. But this is the kind of fishing practices that are practiced in the Sea of Sri Lanka when these Indian fishermen encroach into our waters. Now, don't take our word for it. Listen to Professor MM Hakeim from the University of Colombo as he explains how this has been happening for generations and how this is affecting Sri Lanka.
They come to Sri Lanka from Nagapatnam, Kodikkarai, Rameshwaram and Pamban. This dotted line shows that Sri Lankan maritime border. At approximately 8 p.m, they gradually begin entering the Sea of Sri Lanka. By 10 p.m, most of the Indian vessels have reached Sri Lankan territory. At 1 a.m, approximately 2,500 vessels typically enter the Sea of Sri Lanka. They engage in fishing activities on Sundays, Wednesdays and Saturdays, returning by 4 a.m. Legally, this constitutes a violation of Sri Lanka's sovereignty and the Indo-Lanka Agreement. It also raises the question of whether India condones the violation of Sri Lankan sovereignty by its fishermen.
The Indian National Congress organised the protest led by MP Vijay Vasan.
The government of Sri Lanka detains our fisherfolk and damages their boats. This has led to protests and there are demands for the fisherfolk to be released. The central government of India should intervene immediately to find a solution. There is a perception that the BJP-led central government has not prioritized the concerns of these fisherfolk. The central government should act to rescue the fishermen. The Prime Minister is coming to Kulasekarapuram tomorrow. On behalf of All India Congress Committee, under my leadership, we are protesting the central government's inaction in releasing the fisherfolk. We will hold a peaceful protest tomorrow to demand their release.
Fisherfolk from Rameshwaram have been engaging in a strike exceeding a week, demanding the release of 4 of their counterparts from Tamil Nadu and other fisherfolk who have been incarcerated in Sri Lanka. This protest escalated into a continuous hunger strike over 2 days. Earlier this month, on 2 separate occasions, the Kites Magistrate handed down sentences to 4 Tamil Nadu fishers who were apprehended by the Sri Lankan Navy for encroaching upon the Sea of Sri Lanka and engaging in fishing activities. 3 of these individuals were sentenced to imprisonment for violating the country's territorial waters using GPS technology. This punitive action was taken as these fisherfolk previously released on suspended sentences were found to be repeating the same offences. Sri Lankan fisherfolk held a media briefing in Mannar today. They responded to a statement made by the chairman of the Rameshwaram Trawler Fishermen's Association.
How many millions have I given you? Give it all back to me and then tell me not to come to Kachathiru and not engage in fishing activities. Give it all back. You are reaping the benefits of my VAT. Your livelihood is based on it. I feed you. 100,000 people are in refugee camps. They are also fed with my money. The High Commission of India should be informed about this matter. India should immediately apologize to the people of Sri Lanka for violating the maritime border. The use of GPS indicates that they are knowingly exploiting resources in the Sea of Sri Lanka. They oppose Sri Lanka's legal actions and protests against our actions and refuse to attend the Kachathiru feast. They prevented others from attending this event. We strongly condemn these.
Meanwhile, the Indian High Commissioner of Sri Lanka, Santosh Jha, discussed the matter with Fisheries Minister Douglas Devananda.
I informed them that we cannot give permission for a practice that has been banned. I informed them that if India continues to influence the Sri Lankan government, I will resign from my cabinet portfolio and join the fisherfolk in their struggle for the sea. There is a law that is in force in our country since 2018. We can release them if they come into our sea for the first time. But if they encroach into our sea more than one time, they will be punished. I believe that it is fair. Fisheries associations in Jaffna have said that they are going to protest in the sea. Will you support them? I will not attend it without first resigning from my ministry. But if I resign, I too will attend it. Now, the division of this narrow strip of sea between India and Sri Lanka was not a contentious matter during the time of the British rule, of course, because both India and Sri Lanka were under the British rule. For them, everything was the same. But however, of course, following independence, for the first time, India and Sri Lanka agreed to this border in the year 1974. That was when the initial agreement was made, and even the narrow sea area between India and Sri Lanka were divided. It was a consensus. It was accepted internationally. However, there were issues like this that existed at that time as well. 1979, the laws were revisited. They were revised. Back again in 2018, these laws were revised again. But despite these multiple revisions and the consensus that has been reached between India and Sri Lanka for this to be the border between in this narrow strip of sea, and that neither country would encroach on each other's borders. That has not been the case for at least the several decades that have passed. And this, of course, has seriously affected the fisher folk in the north. It has affected Sri Lanka as a whole, because the sea onto which these Indian fisher folk encroach upon is none other than the Sea of Sri Lanka.
වෙන රටකට ඇවිල්ලා ලංකාවේ මාළු වලන්න බෑ විශේෂයෙන්ම මේක මාළු වලන විතරක් නෙමෙයි මේ අනවසර දීවර ක්‍රම වෙන bottom trawling කියන ක්‍රමයෙන් තමයි.
You cannot come from another country and engage in fishing in Sri Lanka waters. Not just fishing, they most commonly engage in illegal fishing methods such as bottom trawling. The Navy is bound to enforce in the Sri Lankan law. We try our best to prevent them from entering Sri Lankan waters and keeping them away. We always advise them that they are entering Sri Lankan waters and only arrest them if they repeatedly disregard orders and continue to engage in fishing activities. All arrests were made in this manner. All fishing boats have GPS, so they are aware that they are in Sri Lankan waters and they cannot be unaware. The technology is used in Indian fishing vessels. We also have patrol methods to inform them they are in Sri Lankan waters and ask them to leave. Most vessels leave, but some disregard the orders and continue efforts to enter Sri Lankan waters. That is when we make arrests.
නැතුව දිගින් දිගටම ලංකාව මුල් තේමාව අතුලටම එන්න උත්සාහ කරනවා. ඉතින් ඒ වෙලාවට අපි අත්අඩංගුවට ගැනීම සිදු කරනවා.
A senior official of the Ministry of Fisheries said the subject minister discussed this issue with the President and the Indian High Commissioner yesterday. The Fisheries Ministry added that although talks were held between the two countries to resolve the fishing controversy, the talks had stalled for about 1 year. Sri Lanka had requested the Indian government for a discussion through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, no response was given.
The fishing vessels that are seized over time are released for the birthdays of the heads of state of India and Sri Lanka and for respective national days. Evading Sri Lankan waters is a serious offence. That is why cases are filed in Sri Lankan courts and a small amount of vessels are seized and fishing folk are arrested. This should be resolved by diplomatic means between the leaders of the two states.
Well, professionals and fisher folk in the north are calling for this issue to be settled diplomatically. Of course, that's the best course of action that both countries can take at this point of time. But for those of you who think that this is only an issue that affects the north of Sri Lanka, or this is only an issue that affects the fisher folk in the north of Sri Lanka, and therefore we need not worry too much about this, I'm sorry to say, but you're wrong. This is an issue that affects the entirety of Sri Lanka. This is the Sea of Sri Lanka. The resources, the marine resources that are being plundered are not just owned by the fisher folk in the north, they are owned by all Sri Lankans. They are owned by Sri Lanka as a country, because this is the Sea of Sri Lanka. The fisher folk in the north, the fisher folk in the south, the general public across the island, there is absolutely no difference. So this is clearly not an issue that only affects the fisher folk in the north, because this similarly affects fisher folk in the south and also the general public in Sri Lanka as a whole. We've seen in recent times Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, coming to the southern part of India saying, "Our land for our people." Well, here in Sri Lanka also, this is our land. Sri Lanka is our land, and it's time we step up to protect our land, and not forgetting our sea, which is 8 times the landmass of Sri Lanka. And of course, it's to the best interest of both countries that these matters be settled diplomatically. Just imagine if such encroachments of thousands of fishermen happen on a daily basis in any other country. How would those countries react? What kind of response would they make? Would it be stern or would it be mild? Well, Sri Lanka needs to seriously look into this issue, as this is affecting the livelihoods of many fisher folk in the north, and of course affecting the status of Sri Lanka as a country. Sri Lanka's sovereignty is being questioned here, and it's to the best interest of both countries that these matters be settled diplomatically, and steps need to be taken for sure.
Meanwhile, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources Richard Varma has stressed the importance of inclusive democracies where all segments of society are represented.
This is such a critically important relationship as you said, for the Indian Ocean region and maintaining our freedom of navigation, our rules of the road when it comes to commerce and navigation and maritime security and so much more. This is such an important partnership that we have with the government of Sri Lanka. Democracies can be noisy, they can be somewhat untidy, but ultimately they're about people being heard, people's voices being respected, having inclusive democracies where all people are represented. So what does that actually mean in practice? That means hearing from civil society, hearing from business leaders, academia, individuals who have points of view. And I know there's a vibrant civil society here in Sri Lanka as well, and we want to hear from them and make sure their voices are heard.
Moving on to news overseas, the United States claims to have conducted fresh strikes against Houthi targets, destroying missiles, unmanned vessels and a drone.
The U.S. military's Central Command, or CENTCOM, announced the attacks late yesterday. It reported that it had struck 3 unmanned surface vessels and 2 anti-ship cruise missiles that were in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, preparing to launch towards the Red Sea. The drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle, was targeted over the water. CENTCOM claimed that the attacks were launched in self-defense to protect freedom of navigation and to make international waters safer and more secure for U.S. Navy and merchant vessels. The Iran-aligned Houthis, who control the most populous parts of Yemen, have carried out dozens of attacks on vessels with commercial ties to the US, the United Kingdom and Israel in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden since November. The group says the attacks are a response to Israel's military operations in Gaza. Despite the US-UK retaliatory strikes, it has promised to continue its campaign in solidarity with Palestinians until Israel stops its war on Gaza. The campaign has disrupted international commerce along a route that accounts for about 15% of the world's shipping traffic.
Farmers have clashed violently with police in the European quarter of Brussels, spraying officers with liquid manure and setting fire to mounds of tires, while the European Union's agriculture ministers met to discuss the crisis in their sector.
At least 900 tractors jammed streets in the center of the Belgian capital, with protesters throwing bottles and eggs and setting off fireworks while riot police fired water cannon. Farmers from Spain, Portugal and Italy joined their Belgian counterparts for the latest show of force by a months-long Europe-wide movement demanding action on high costs, low product prices, cheap non-EU imports and strict EU environmental laws. The rolling protests, which on Saturday led to the French President Emmanuel Macron being heckled by furious farmers at the Paris Agricultural Fair, have unnerved leaders before European elections in June that are likely to produce major gains for far-right populist parties. The EU has already rolled back on several parts of its flagship Green Deal plan in an effort to appease farmers, scrapping references to farming emissions from its 2040 climate roadmap, withdrawing a law to cut pesticides use and delaying a target for farmers to leave some land fallow to improve biodiversity. The bloc has also introduced safeguards to stop Ukrainian imports flooding the market under a tariff-free scheme introduced after Russia's 2022 invasion.
Taking a look at more local news, although the Cabinet has decided to suspend the implementation of Parat law until the 15th of December 2024, State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya said the right of banks to take legal action against customers will not be impacted.
If someone fails to repay a loan obtained by mortgaging an asset, financial institutions will be able to sell the relevant assets and collect the money due under this Parat execution. A proposal to temporarily suspend the implementation of the law was submitted during yesterday's cabinet meeting by the President in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, with the involvement of the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Industries, and it was approved. State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya said the right of a bank to take action in court and file lawsuits will not be removed under this suspension. He added, quote, "The Central Bank of Sri Lanka has taken steps to protect the banking system, while the President, in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, has taken steps to protect small and medium-scale businesses by presenting this cabinet paper," unquote.
Spice Horizons, tracing the legacy of protected geographical indication, Ceylon cinnamon and the future of other PGI products for export development, took place in Colombo today.
Spice Horizons, tracing the legacy of protected geographical indication, Ceylon cinnamon and the future of other PGI products for export development, took place in Colombo today. The United Nations Industrial Development Organization is leading a European Union-funded project titled Best Standardized Practices for the Agri-Food Sector Development, co-implemented with the Food and Agriculture Organization.
Now, the production of spices in Sri Lanka has steadily grown, as we know, over the last decades. And spices they play a vital role in, as a source of foreign exchange earnings. The sector also generates employment and provides an income for many small-scale farmers and other stakeholders along the value chain. But in my view, it's not only about exports. The people in Sri Lanka use many spices in preparing their food on a daily basis, and improving your health and safety for me is equally important too. So together we kind of started this journey now more than a decade ago, when the first STDF project brought together the Sri Lanka government, the Spice Council, UNIDO, to work on Ceylon cinnamon, which is one of Sri Lanka's most famous export. So I think, you should all be really proud on what has been achieved so far. But I also think that we should not stop here. It's time to scale up. It's time to replicate what was done for cinnamon, for other key spices that provide a livelihood for many more small-scale producers and stakeholders along the value chain. And this is where the new project, this time targeted at pepper, cloves, nutmeg, comes in. This new project will continue to improve the safety, the quality levels of spices in Sri Lanka. And the vision is that the Cinnamon Trading Academy will be turned into the Spice Trading Academy.
The project is aimed at strengthening the spice and concentrates value chain towards greater food safety and quality performance and traceability for the inclusive socio-economic development of the agri-food sector, and to effectively champion the reputation of Ceylon spices in export markets, in particular pepper, cloves and nutmeg or mace.
And with that, we wrap up news for tonight.
Thank you for watching. Good night.